The what's it called? It's been a long time since I recorded this. The Sundiver Mark IV, I believe. Now, the goal of this spacecraft is to take one Kerbal down from Icarus Station, which is a 200 megameter orbit, down to somewhere between 40 and 50 megameter orbit, and that does include apoapsis. I think there's some science on board to run, and then maybe not though. And then they'll take that Kerbal back to Icarus Station. Uh, so I chose the 200 megameter orbit because it's the lowest I could go without like pointing a specific direction all the time. But this thing does have to point a specific direction all the time, and you'll see how it works later when we actually get to work it. So this will probably be a fairly short episode in comparison to the other ones, seeing as well, we're not actually going to do anything with it. It's just like the same rendezvous and docking procedure we've seen before. Speaking of which, we've escaped Kerbin, we've done our launch, and we are doing the plane change and retrograde burn here, which is mostly done on the nuclear stage. I learned my lesson a long time ago about not including enough fuel for this and having to do it on ions. Uh, that's very painful at this distances when I packed enough solar panels for being right next to the sun, and it's like maybe barely enough to run a light bulb at this point. So I'm done with that burn for the most part, although I do try and get my ascending descending nodes a little bit more precise because they take way more fuel to use to correct once we get like low around the sun. And as you can see now, we are approaching the sun. So you looking at closer at the craft, you can see they're at the same nuclear stage we usually use. It was even the same launch vehicle, and there's the same ion tug we usually use. This thing might actually be lighter than the other payloads, so it might end up with more fuel. But honestly, I don't remember. It's been a long time since I've seen the end of this video. But yeah, so we're doing our first big retro burn, and I do believe we go a lot more aggressive with this retro burn. I think we use like 6 sets of ion tanks, and here we have the first problem of the mission. Uh, First of all, there was a load there because I didn't work earlier, and I had to use ignore max temperature to load it because like I've talked about that in the previous episodes. There's a temperature spike upon loading, and nothing I can do about that, unfortunately. And what you saw there early, it was really brief, but the game lags really bad for some reason when like your electric charge gets below zero when you're time warping. And you look on the left side when we're time warping, the ion engines are kind of staggered, and when that gets to zero, problems happen. Uh, so basically we get around that by only going to 30x time warp instead of 50x time warp for the rest of the mission. Now here is where the second big design problem is evident. The radiators clip into the fuel tanks, and since we need those radiators this low when we're sideways, we need to find a way to jettison those fuel tanks. Uh, and eventually I do figure out how, but I'll talk about that when it happens. But before that happens, I want to say we burnt the nuclear stage, the rest of it, and we have burnt 4 sets of drop tanks so far. And I think we're actually going to go up to 6 on this pass. So this was a really aggressive pass with the braking, and I think I can afford to do that because it's lighter. And that, you see, is our method of jettisoning the side tanks. We retract one radiator, ditch the thing, and hopefully it doesn't break the panel. It actually does one time when I have to quick load, but for most of the time it doesn't. We did it again, and it worked again. And there, I time warped too fast, and the RTG I kept inside the bay, just for in case I accidentally pointed away from the sun. I mean, it's really hard to point away from the sun when we're this close, but it's still modeled as a point source, and I only have a few solar panels that are like swept back, so it's actually fairly easy to uh, get pointed away from the sun. I had that there for those situations, but it exploded. But since we don't technically need it, I just was like, okay, I'll watch my orientation, and I can proceed with the mission without it. Um, I do believe we're going to do a correction at apoapsis here, but since that's fairly boring, I'll take this time to explain a bit why it's been a while since the most recent video. Like, I actually have a backlog of recordings for even back, and maybe I forget if the next episode of Solar Station is recorded or not. Um, but basically, I don't like my recording to get too ahead of my editing, and I was just really burnt out on editing for a while. Like, I was doing daily videos for like 2 weeks straight, which is a bit more than I can reasonably, like, I got burned out on that fairly quickly. So the videos will resume at their normal rate. Like, basically, when I got back from college, like, I was I was like all gung ho on it, and I was gonna do a ton of stuff. And that's where I broke the radiator, by the way. And it broke it again on quick load, so we had to use like 30 seconds of ignore max temperature to fix that. Yada yada yada. You get that? I've explained that. And we're doing the most of the rest of the retro burn here. As you can see, our apoapsis is around 500 millimeters right now, I do believe. Uh, and these last tanks we can actually jettison because for some reason they jettison at like a 45-degree angle forwards instead of straight backwards. I don't know why that is, but they do. uh, Quirk of the game, I guess. But yeah, basically, TLDR. I don't like it when I mean, I did like it at the time, but like I cannot. I'll never be a big YouTuber because I cannot maintain. Okay, there are YouTubers who don't do a big cadence, but like I cannot maintain. Basically, I can't maintain a 1 day video cadence. As you can see here, we are now setting up our final rendezvous approach, and we are on our last big ion tank of ion engines. And since this is my last time to like really explain the design of the spacecraft before it ends, the heat shield on the bottom is always pointed towards the sun, and there's actually 3 heat shields in there, clipped in a weird way, so that they actually last longer than one heat shield, and yeah, explode again a few times because I have to time warp all that distance. And then there are 2 ion engines, the engines are actually stuck off on the side, and the fuel tanks on top are jettisoned like one by one. That's our staging mechanism, and the thrust limiters on the 2 ion engines on the side are adjusted to keep the center of thrust pointed through the center of mass, more or less, within abilities of our torque to correct that. Now this may seem like it would be really hard to balance and would be unstable in time warp, but due to like the low thrust, like it's only 2 ion engines, I think I can actually run it reasonably up to 100 times time warp if I try hard enough. Yeah. So you can see we're slowly getting closer. I have a bit of a problem with things overheating sometimes, but you know the sun is right there, so nothing a little saving and loading can't fix. And I think the problem I'm having here is that with the direction I need to point to slow down, I will basically burn up. Like there's a very, very, very narrow window I can go where I won't explode. And I do think I end up losing a few parts that I'm like, okay, I can live without that part since we're so close. And I do think I actually end up overshooting the thing. And actually at this point, since I was going to load the craft, I do keep ignore max temperature on for that. And I think I did accidentally keep it on a bit too long one of those times, but I quick loaded it anyway, so it wasn't that big of a deal. But as you can see, I'm just having the worst time, like pointing in a way that I can face target retrograde and also not explode. So I think I just end up burning off of that direction, like not on that direction, and I burned up the station there because I forgot to turn the ignore max temperature on. And then I overshoot it, and then I reorient myself, and I come in a better way. Yeah. And I did end up retracting that radiator so it wouldn't explode, which seems counterintuitive, but, you know, whatever. So this orientation is much, much, much more favorable for us, and we haven't exploded any major things yet. And there we are. We have arrived at the solar station, and I really quickly turn on ignore max temperature to correct its orientation, because if it's pointed a different direction, and because of the saving load, things might explode. And now the thing is I have to dock it, and I want to dock it so the heat shield is facing down. And that is much easier said than done, because first of all, my first attempt was I was going to try and dock it just like the reasonable way like that. But what actually happens is I have to detach this like docking arm and probe. I have to attach it to the junior port on the side of it, and then I have to dock it from there. And that takes me several tries, as you can see there. Like it's going to be, and also if I leave this long enough without radiators, it will explode. So there's a time limit. There's an electric charge limit on this thing. Actually, no, there's not. There's not, because that thing does have a solar panel. Yeah, it's a temperature limit. Anyway, so I have to undock it. I have to point the junior point. I have to dock, which I just did there. I think I almost exploded a few things there. And then I have to use the limited monopropellant. There's only 22 remaining to try and dock it to the station so the heat shield is facing down in the proper station orientation. And after a while, after many, 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 many saves and loads, I managed to successfully accomplish that. And there is the Sundiver Mark IV attached to Solar Icarus Station. And in the next episode, we're actually going to launch the Sundiver Mark III, which is counterintuitively more advanced than Sundiver IV. But anyway, we will I'll talk about that when we get there. So thank you so much for watching. Ultimate Steve out.